is there still enough a piece of the pie here for Trey McBride to replicate the 81 catches that he had a season ago, keeping in mind that he was on 112 catch pace with Kyler Murray?
It's a great question. It's a question we get asked a lot on PHNX Cardinals. Here's what I will say. The Cardinals run a version of the Kyle Shanahan offense, which features George Kittle. They, I think, are going to be an extension of what Ben Johnson did in Detroit, which had Sam Laporta eat amongst Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think they're going to be enough targets. I don't think they're going to be as Trey McBride dependent, because how could they? I think it's realistic to expect similar receiving numbers in terms of 800 yards, but I think the touchdowns go up significantly. He had 3 last year. He's going to have much more, I would say, eased coverage in the red zone. They were putting number 1 corners on him. Jalen Johnson, when they went to Chicago, shadowed Trey McBride. You can't do that now with Marvin Harrison Jr. So he's going to have third corners, safeties, off-ball linebackers. I think he could reach 8 to 10 touchdowns receiving-wise, and that's more than enough to justify it from a fantasy perspective. But you're right. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Did the Cardinals, in a deep 2024 quarterback draft class, ever consider taking a signal caller? Are they that confident in Kyler Murray? And beyond Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride, who is catching passes in the desert? And what kind of role will rookie running back Trey Benson have if James Conner doesn't get hurt? PHNX's Johnny Venerable gave me insight into all that and more. I'm Joe Dolan. Like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Fantasy Points YouTube channel for 32 breakdowns of all 32 NFL teams. This is Franchise Focus, Arizona Cardinals. So, Johnny, obviously last year was a year of transition for the Arizona Cardinals' new coach and Jonathan Gannon, and Kyler Murray wasn't even ready to play at the beginning of the season. So it almost is like 2024 is a new start for the Cardinals. What are Cardinal fans, or what are you as a beat writer and a beat reporter most excited to see about this Cardinal team in 2024?
Yeah, I think it's just the fact that they were playing without a full deck last year. No pun intended. Kyler Murray doesn't play for the first 9 games of last season. He doesn't get an offseason. Now it's like, okay, we can really implement everything this offseason, build upon what worked, and maybe pivot off of what didn't work. They got a lot of house money to play with last year. Everybody understood the assignment, right? When Vegas is predicting that Cardinal team to win no games last year, and then the team is overly competitive, they damn near almost play 500 football with Kyler Murray, they're in a position now to say, okay, anything's really possible. And so I think it's a conjunction of course, Kyler Murray building upon last year. He had a 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. He played with a lot of guys that are back in the fold now. We mentioned Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Trey McBride. And then, of course, the acquisition of Marvin Harrison Jr. They're set up for success short-term and long-term. This is a foundational building process where, okay, these are not Band-Aid free agents. This is not A.J. Green. This is not, respectfully, DeAndre Hopkins at the tail end of his career. These are players that are going to grow with Kyler Murray. And I think you pivot that now, or you combine that, I should say, with the building of the culture from Jonathan Gannon, who has taken a team defensively to a Super Bowl, who got this Cardinal team to overachieve last year based on their talent level. And there's a lot to be excited about. They still play in a very difficult division, but you can see the semblance, the bones of what this team aspires to be long-term.
So Kyler Murray, obviously, I think the Cardinals were always supportive of him publicly, and still are, obviously. But there had to have been a point last year where you were like, yeah, this guy is playing for his job. When did the beat writers realize that, all right, that is no longer a question, even though this team's going to be picking at the top of the draft? When did you realize that Kyler Murray was going to be the quarterback of the present and future for the Cardinals? And what can he do in 2024 to take the next step in Drew Petzing's offense?
That's a really good question. And a lot of people who were cynical to the idea of Kyler Murray being the guy, I mean, the Cardinals showed you with their actions that they were committed to him. Now, he had to pick up, his end of the bargain. I think he did that at the end of the year, and I'll get to that here in a second. But, I tell this to everybody who will listen. The Cardinals could have had Caleb Williams. They were in a position last year where they had won 1 game with Joshua Dobbs. They had checked that box, right? They'd beaten the Dallas Cowboys. They could have started Joshua Dobbs and or Clayton Tune the rest of the year, gone 1-16 and drafted Caleb Williams. That was presented to them. And they said, nope, we're going to give Kyler Murray every opportunity over the final 2 months of the regular season to take this job and run with it. And there were some ups and downs, but Kyler Murray was 2 missed Matt Prater field goals away in the final 2 minutes against Seattle from going 500, 4-4 with that team last year against what I would tell you definitively, and we had all the metrics laid out on our show, was the hardest remaining strength of schedule in the NFL. They played Pittsburgh. They played Philadelphia. They played the Rams. They played the 49ers. Kyler Murray, they played Seattle, who had a winning record. Kyler Murray, if Matt Prater makes one of 2 field goals within the final 2 minutes in the finale, goes 4-4. And so I think second half of Philadelphia, when they're down 21-6 and he leads a comeback against the team that spurned Jonathan Gannon publicly and privately, I think that was a big deal for a lot of people inside and outside of that locker room. I think going on the road against Pittsburgh and walloping the Steelers and Mike Tomlin and their culture was a big deal. And then, of course, his debut beating Atlanta at home, who, by the way, had a respectable year last year as well. So I think it was in conjunction where he was playing his best football at the end of the year. If you would have asked Kyler Murray publicly, he would have opted to keep playing. He had a nice game or a nice 2-game stretch to end the season. I think through 6 touchdowns to either 1 or 0 interceptions the final 2 games of the regular season. So I think it was all that in combined. But, again, the Cardinals could have had their pick of these top quarterbacks. They could have, quote unquote, tanked the second half of the season. Jonathan Gannon and Monty Ossenford did not select and draft Kyler Murray. And I think it is a huge, huge point of confidence for K1 for them to be around him, contract or not, for 8 months and say, we're going to stick our careers, at least in the short term, to K1. So that's the front end of the question. The back half is just build upon that, right? He's got to play close to 17 games this year. If you're going to be critical of K1, it's the fact he hasn't completed a full regular season since 2020. But if he plays 16, 17 games this year, his trajectory historically as an NFL player is he's going to have 30-plus total touchdowns. He's going to have 4,000-plus total yards. He's going to put this team in a position to win 8, 9, 10 games, and that's going to be good enough, especially with this team, although I like what they have offensively, defensively still needing another full offseason to re-enter the contender category.
Yeah, and obviously there could be a lot of plays run on offense, which would certainly help the fantasy outlook for Kyler Murray. Also helping the fantasy outlook for Kyler Murray, and we don't need to go too far into the weeds here because they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. And quite frankly, I mean, I don't know if the Cardinals last year had somebody who was on a wide receiver 2 level of wide receiver, let alone a wide receiver 1 level of wide receiver. What is Drew Petzing and Jonathan Gannon? What have they said about the way that Marvin Harrison can kind of unlock this offense? And do you anticipate that he's going to be their target leader as a rookie?
Yes, 100%. They would prefer to build their team line of scrimmage based. Like Jonathan Gannon had that philosophy in Philadelphia. You saw that. And then Drew Petzing prefers to run the football. I mean, they ran the football more times than not on first and second down than any team in the NFL. And I think that they want to continue that. They want to work off the play action. They want Kyler Murray under center that's going to prolong his career. But they didn't have the number 1 alpha receiver. I think in like a perfect world, they would have taken Joe Alt or a pass rusher in the top 10 if this is a normal year. But it wasn't a normal year. The best player in what I think is each of the last 2 drafts just happened to be available to them at pick 4. 3 quarterbacks went ahead of him, and the football gods, I mentioned Matt Prater earlier, allowed Kyler Murray and Jonathan Gannon and Monty Ossenford to be able to select Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think he's going to lead the team in targets. I think the robust projections are accurate. 1,200 yards is realistic. Double-digit touchdowns is realistic. And I also think, while there's nobody as proven of a prospect as MHJ on the roster, Michael Wilson had a sneaky good rookie year last year, and he's only going to be helped by the arrival of MHJ. They've got what I think is a bona fide superstar tight end in Trey McBride, a top 3 to 5 tight end in the NFL, returning in the second year under this offense. And then Greg Dortch, who has really his first true opportunity with Rondale Moore no longer being in the fold to own the slot position. So, I mean, it's sneakily a group that should round out pretty well. Like Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. are your 2 unquestioned alpha outside receivers, both supplanting 6'2", 6'3". Marvin may even be 6'4" on a good day. And then you've got Dortch, who plays bigger than his size underneath. And then, the aforementioned Trey McBride. It's a group that with James Conner running the football, they drafted Trey Benson. everybody complements each other's skill sets well. Whereas if you look at this offense under Cliff Kingsbury, not to kind of beat a dead horse here, but it was a lot of, hey, Kyler Murray, hey, D-Hop, go play backyard football, figure it out, right? And there was no cohesiveness to anything they did. Whereas now you can see the outline of where this offense is and where it can go from August, September, all the way to January, and it should only improve.
You mentioned Trey McBride. With Kyler Murray last year, he was on a 112 catch pace. With Kyler Murray, he had either 5 catches, a touchdown, or both in all 8 games they played together last year. Is there still enough of a piece of the pie here? You mentioned how much Drew Petzing likes to run the football.
Yeah.
Is there still enough a piece of the pie here for Trey McBride to replicate the 81 catches that he had a season ago, keeping in mind that he was on 112 catch pace with Kyler Murray?
It's a great question. It's a question we get asked a lot on PHNX Cardinals. Here's what I will say. The Cardinals run a version of the Kyle Shanahan offense, which features George Kittle. They, I think, are going to be an extension of what Ben Johnson did in Detroit, which had Sam Laporta eat amongst Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, I think they're going to be enough targets. I don't think they're going to be as Trey McBride dependent, because how could they? I think it's realistic to expect similar receiving numbers in terms of 800 yards, but I think the touchdowns go up significantly. He had 3 last year. He's going to have much more, I would say, eased coverage in the red zone. Like, they were putting number 1 corners on him. Jalen Johnson, when they went to Chicago, shadowed Trey McBride. Like, you can't do that now with Marvin Harrison Jr. So he's going to have third corners, safeties, off-ball linebackers. I think he could reach 8 to 10 touchdowns receiving wise. And that's more than enough to justify it from a fantasy perspective. But you're right. Like, with Michael Wilson coming into his own, the arrival of MHJ, like Trey McBride, I think here's the rebuttal to my argument. He only started 12 games last year. Like, they were still trotting out Zach Ertz for the first quarter of the year plus as really kind of a make good to Zach Ertz. He's a veteran. I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer. And so they allowed Zach Ertz to kind of ease into the season before releasing him. He just wasn't healthy after his torn ACL. So if you just say, okay, well, Trey's going to be the starter for 17 weeks, I can wrap my mind around 800, 900 yards. That's roughly what, 50 yards per game? I think Trey can hit that, but I don't think 100 catches, that's asking a lot, man.
Yeah. So they also, I want to clarify something. They drafted Tip Reiman, the tight end at Illinois. He's a massive guy.
Yeah.
You know, big, powerful guy. But he's fast, but he's essentially a lighter offensive tackle. Do you think he poses any threat to Trey McBride's receiving role at all?
0. And we had his offensive coordinator, offensive line coach on our show right after the draft. And they underutilized him in part because they had some deficiencies at quarterback at Illinois. And he's somebody that went from a projected late day 3 pick to, oh, this guy's got historic metrics, and so he's going to go, just because this is how it works in the NFL now, he's going to go top 100. I think they have a nice secondary tight end in Elijah Higgins that was a converted wide receiver from Stanford that they really liked last year. But Trey McBride's one of one. And so I think Tip Reiman, I think you could see Tip in a Kyle Juszczyk role. I think you'd see him, obviously, as a 6 offensive lineman, but he's an elite run blocker. That's why they drafted him. They want to be able to run the football. So it was a little rich for me, by the way, when they took him with the top 90 pick, but they also had, I think, like 7 top 90 picks this year. So they can splurge a little bit on a run blocker if they wanted to.
Well, let's get to that running game. Obviously, James Conner still in town. And at Fantasy Points, we will never undersell the fact that we are constantly wrong on James Conner. Oh, this has got to be the year. You know, he's gonna finally, just his body's gonna give out. But one of those top 100 picks you mentioned was spent on Trey Benson. Let's look at ADP right now, average draft position on Underdog Fantasy. We have James Conner going as the 27th running back off the board. We have Trey Benson going off as the 30th running back, and this is across all drafts. So there is an expectation among the fantasy community, at least, that Trey Benson's going to come in here and have an immediate role, and or if James Conner gets hurt, is going to become kind of a bell cow back in the James Conner style. How do you see Trey Benson's role shaking out as a rookie?
It's really hard to telegraph, because when James is healthy, he's a top 10 back in the NFL, unquestioned, but he always misses time. Like, you're signing up for, I think, 13, 14 games at best. And he played his best football at the end of last year. Like, he was running over people week 15, 16, 17. Yeah. He averaged over 5 yards per carry. It's his first 1,000 yard receiving or rushing season in his career, which is crazy. So he's also a captain. He's also one of the most, if not the most high character guy they have on the roster. Like they are not going to brush him aside. He is going to get the bulk share of the carries. Now, I think Halloween, Thanksgiving, you could see a little bit more of a platoon. And of course, at any point, if James goes down, like Michael Carter Jr. is around, but he is the more change of pace guy. Like Trey Benson would start for them. So I think initially, if I had to put a percentage on it, 65% James Conner, maybe 25% Trey Benson, and then whatever's left over, 10% Michael Carter, who looked really good, by the way. They claimed him. They wanted him on the roster this year. But barring something unforeseen, let's say Trey Benson, God forbid, has an injury or just doesn't look good, like this is Trey Benson's backfield in 2025. And if you're hedging, yeah, it's smart to take him early because you saw the production from James Conner in this offense with not a lot of household names. What can Trey Benson do late this year and in 2025 in an offense that's absolutely loaded with MHJ and Michael Wilson and Trey McBride and Paris Johnson Jr. at tackle? Like, it is a Rolls Royce for a running back in today's NFL. Like they came from Cleveland, they came from Detroit. We saw those two run games at the highest level in the NFL. Like, that's what the Cardinals want to do, and you got a piece of it last year.
Yeah, James Conner, by the way, not under contract beyond this year. It's not even they can save money by cutting him. It's literally his contract expires after this year. So the Cardinals really didn't have much at the wide receiver position last year at all. They drafted Marvin Harrison, but still beyond Marvin Harrison, you have a bunch of, you got this guy and Michael Wilson, kind of interesting. But like in the fantasy community, sometimes we like to light the Dortch torch, man. Like I argued that Greg Dortch was better at being Rondale Moore than Rondale Moore was.
Yeah.
I mean, like, he was more productive in the same role. But of the names here that are relatively interesting, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, and then a guy who I've been drafting a lot late in best ball drafts so far, Zay Jones, who they picked up from the Jaguars. Which of those guys has the best chance to be third on this team in targets behind Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride?
Michael Wilson. Like, I can say that with 100% confidence, and I love Greg Dortch, and I'm intrigued by Zay Jones. Let's start. Zay Jones is a depth signing, and he can play all three positions, but that's only if something goes wrong with MHJ, Michael Wilson, or Greg Dortch. Let's call a spade there. Greg Dortch is their primary returner, and I don't think that they want to run a lot of 11 personnel. Like, if you're running 1 to 2 receiver sets, it's Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. Yeah. So by that equation, Michael Wilson is the option. Michael Wilson stays healthy. I have full confidence in saying it's a guy who's going to creep toward 1,000 yards and 5 to 7 touchdowns. Like, I've banged this drum on multiple shows this offseason. He went into San Francisco last year with Joshua Dobbs, 7 targets, 7 receptions, and 2 touchdowns. Like, he has the physical ability to be a very nice, dare I say, T. Higgins complement to the Jamar Chase MHJ equation. Like, that's a real comparison I think has warrant. But can he stay healthy? He was hurt at Stanford. Yeah. He was dominant at training camp for a rebuilding Cardinal team last year, and then hit a rookie wall and missed a little bit of time, but then came back and played really well. Go look at his finale against Seattle, almost 100 yards. Best receiving game of his season, cooking with Kyler Murray. And Kyler Murray, on record yesterday, meeting with the media, Michael Wilson is a beast. He's going to have a big year. So, I'm trying to emphasize to everybody, do not overthink this. I love Greg Dortch. He has a podcast on our network at PHNX Sports. He is the underneath slot receiver return man. Michael Wilson is the number 2 receiver for the Arizona Cardinals that was drafted by this regime with a top 100 pick. If he is healthy, like, it would not surprise me against the Buffalo Bills in week 1 if he had more receiving yards than Marvin Harrison Jr. because he's not going to be double covered anymore. He's not going to have number 1 corners. That's going to go to MHJ. So he's the perfect complement for what they want to do. Plus, when they run the football, they're not running the football with undersized receivers. Rondale Moore, Greg Dortch, they took those guys out purposely. Marvin and Michael are able to help with that, and thus they're just going to see more time on the field.
I need to reevaluate my portfolio when I have a lot more Zay Jones, who's cheaper than Michael Wilson, by the way, but I have a lot more Zay Jones than Michael Wilson. You have sold me, Johnny Venerable. You can catch Johnny Venerable at PHNX Cardinals and the PHNX Cardinals podcast. He does absolutely wonderful job with his co-host Bo Brack. His Twitter handle is at Johnny Venerable. That is a real name. I think I mentioned last year, it sounds like an awesome pro wrestling heel name. But regardless, I think our listeners can see that and can hear that you are not a heel. You are an absolute authority on all things Arizona Cardinals. Johnny, it's been wonderful talking to you again this year.
Thank you guys. Thanks so much for the support. We appreciate it. Look forward to chatting in the coming months.